While my wife stood beneath a gold banner accepting the city's Woman of the Year award, she thanked me for being the quiet man who had supported every brave choice she ever made. I was sitting 6 tables from the stage with a flash drive in my jacket pocket and a divorce attorney's card behind it. Claire thought the drive contained a tribute video from our marriage. It did, for the first 40 seconds. After that, the ballroom was going to hear how she had turned our marriage into an inspirational lie, moved into a donor-funded house with another man, and convinced half the room that I was the husband she had escaped. She had spent 3 years building a public life around surviving me. The only problem was that she still came home to me on Sundays, still let me pay the mortgage, and still kissed my cheek before asking whether I could repair one more building for her charity. I did not know what the room would do when the video changed. I only knew that when the lights came back on, I would no longer be waiting for Claire to decide which version of her husband she needed. We had been married for 17 years. I met Claire when she was a case manager at a family shelter, and I was repairing water damage in the apartment above it. I owned a small restoration company with my older brother, Paul. At the time, that meant 2 vans, 4 employees, and a phone that rang whenever someone else's ceiling started leaking. Claire was different from anyone I knew. She remembered the names of children she had met once. She could sit with a frightened woman at a plastic table for 2 hours without looking at the clock. She hated speeches, expensive restaurants, and people who treated charity work like a photograph of themselves handing over a check. That was the woman I married. 9 years later, Claire told me she wanted to start a housing program called Harbor Home. The plan was simple. Families leaving emergency shelters needed small apartments, help finding work, and enough time to stop making every decision in panic. Claire had the experience. What she did not have was a building. Paul and I had just finished renovating an old brick duplex on Mercer Street. We planned to sell it. Instead, I convinced him to let Harbor Home lease it at cost for a year. I refinanced our house to cover the gap. Claire cried when I handed her the keys. Within 3 years, Harbor Home had 6 properties, a staff of 12, and a waiting list. Claire became the kind of person local reporters called when they needed a quote about housing or domestic abuse. She learned how to speak in clean sentences that fit beneath a photograph. Donors liked her because she could make a room feel guilty and hopeful at the same time. At first, I was proud of every bit of it. I repaired broken cabinets at night. I replaced locks between tenants. My crews charged for materials and donated most of the labor. When Harbor Home held its first fundraiser in a church basement, I stood behind a folding table and poured coffee while Claire raised enough money to keep Mercer Street open for another year. Then Adrian Cole joined the board. Adrian ran a regional property company his father had started. He wore dark suits that looked effortless and knew which reporter was sitting at which table before he entered a room. His first donation was larger than Harbor Home's entire original budget. His second was a narrow 3-story house on Cedar Lane. Claire began coming home from board meetings with new words: branding, visibility, executive presence. She hired a communications director. She traded the second-hand briefcase I had bought her for a soft leather bag that cost more than our first car. None of that bothered me by itself. Success was supposed to change things. I just did not notice how often the thing being changed was me. At a donor lunch, Claire introduced Paul as co-owner of Brennan Restoration. Then she touched my arm and called me one of Harbor Home's earliest contractors. I laughed and said, "Also the husband." The people around us laughed too. Claire did not. In the car, she said I had made her look unprepared. "You made me sound like someone you hired," I said. "It was a professional room, Noah. I'm professionally married to you." She stared out the window and told me this was exactly why she kept the different parts of her life separate. That sentence stayed with me, but not strongly enough. The first time I understood what separate meant was 7 weeks before the gala. One of my crews was replacing a damaged floor in a harbor home apartment. I stopped by with a box of fittings. A woman named Renee was there with her little boy. I remembered them because I had fixed the boy's bedroom window the previous winter. Renee saw me in the hallway and went completely still. I asked if something was wrong. She looked toward my foreman, then back at me. "Does Claire know you're here?" I said Claire knew. My company handled the repair. Renee pulled her son closer. "I mean, does she know you can just come around her buildings?" Her voice had changed. She was not talking to a contractor. She was talking to a man she had been warned about. I asked what Claire had told her. Renee apologized immediately. She said she must have misunderstood a speech. Then she took her son into the bedroom and closed the door. That night, I searched Claire's name and the word speech. I found a recording from a regional nonprofit conference. The video had been online for 4 months. Claire stood on a stage in a white jacket and told a story about the night she decided no woman should have to earn permission to feel safe in her own home. She never said my name. She did not have to. She described a husband who monitored every purchase, punched a hole beside the kitchen door, and threatened to throw her out if she went back to school. She said she had spent years making herself smaller before she finally changed the locks. The details came from our life, but she had turned each one around. I tracked our spending during the year we were trying to keep my business alive. Claire had asked me to because overdraft fees scared her. The hole beside the kitchen door came from a pipe that burst inside the wall. I cut the drywall open at midnight. And when Claire went back for her nonprofit management certificate, I took the night jobs that paid for it. I watched the speech twice. At the end, the audience stood for her. Claire came home after 11. I had the video paused on the television. Her face filled the screen behind me. She did not ask how I found it. She took off her earrings and said, "It is a composite story. With our kitchen, with details from many women, and our bank account, and your certificate." Claire sighed as if I had interrupted something. She said audiences needed one clear journey. She said no client could safely carry the whole story in public, so she used pieces of her own life to protect them. "You made them think I abused you. I did not identify you. Renee identified me." For the first time, Claire looked worried, not sorry, worried. She asked exactly what Renee had said. When I would not tell her, Claire accused me of putting a vulnerable client in the middle of our marriage. Somehow, within 5 minutes, I was defending myself for asking why my wife had invented a violent husband who looked exactly like me. Then she sat beside me and softened her voice. The story had doubled donations after the conference. Cedar Lane was being renovated. More families would have homes. Did I really want her to pull down a speech that was helping people because strangers might make the wrong assumption? I wanted to believe the good work still belonged to the woman I married, so I accepted an answer that insulted both of us. I told her the story could never be used again. Claire promised. 3 days later, the city announced her Woman of the Year award. The press release called Claire Brennan, a survivor who transformed her private struggle into a public refuge. She had approved the sentence. When I put the release on the kitchen counter, Claire said the communications team wrote it from old material. She promised it would disappear after the gala. "After you accept the award for it?" I asked. She said I was reducing 12 years of work to one line in a press release. Maybe I was, but that one line had my face behind it. The same week, Claire asked me to help make her gala tribute video. She wanted photographs from Harbor Home's early years, including the day I gave her the Mercer Street keys. She said it would mean a lot if the audience saw how much I had supported her. In private, I was useful again. I told her I would find the photographs. That Friday, an alarm company called me just after 1 in the morning. Years earlier, I had installed the original system at the Cedar Lane house. Apparently, my number was still listed as the backup contact. A side window sensor had failed, and they could not reach the primary contact. Claire was supposed to be at a housing conference in Chicago. I called her twice. Both calls went to voicemail. Cedar Lane was 20 minutes from our house. The building was meant to become 2 transitional apartments. Harbor Home had held a public campaign around the renovation. I had seen pictures of stripped floors and exposed plaster, but the project had supposedly stalled because of permit delays. When I turned onto Cedar Lane, Claire's car was parked behind the house. Adrian's was beside it. The failed window sensor had triggered a yellow light on the side of the building. Every other window was dark except the kitchen. New curtains hung inside. There were plants on the sill and 2 wineglasses near the sink. Claire walked into view wearing a gray sweater I had given her for Christmas. Adrian came behind her and wrapped one arm around her waist. She leaned back against him as naturally as if they had ended 1,000 evenings that way. I did not knock. I did not call again. I sat in my truck across the street until the alarm technician arrived. I told him the owner had handled it and drove home before Claire could see me. At 6 the next morning, she sent a message from Cedar Lane telling me Chicago had been exhausting and she would catch a later flight. That lie hurt more than watching Adrian touch her. An affair was one betrayal. Waking up in another home, putting on the sweater I bought, and texting me from a city she had never visited was a whole life. I did not become a detective. I did not need months of phone records or a private investigator. I checked the things that were already tied to me. The refinance on our home had helped Harbor Home open Mercer Street. I was still a guarantor on an old bridge loan, so the charity sent annual notices to our address. In the latest packet, Cedar Lane was listed as completed executive housing, not transitional housing. The change had been approved 11 months earlier by a committee Adrian chaired. I called Harbor Home's finance director, Melissa, and asked when the property plan had changed. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Noah, I thought Claire told us you were divorced." I asked who us meant. Melissa said the staff, the board, everyone. Claire had described me as an estranged former husband who still did occasional contract work. The board had approved temporary use of Cedar Lane by the executive director because Claire claimed she needed a secure residence away from me. Adrian had disclosed that he sometimes stayed there for security. I almost laughed at that word. Security. Melissa started asking questions, but I ended the call. I did not want a frightened employee carrying the confrontation for me. That evening, I waited at our kitchen table. Claire came in at 8 with her suitcase and kissed the air beside my cheek. I asked, "Where did you sleep Wednesday night?" She said the Palmer Hotel in Chicago. I asked, "Who lives at Cedar Lane?" Claire stopped moving. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she set her suitcase upright and told me not to do anything emotional before the gala. Not before she apologized, not before she explained, before the gala. I asked how long she had been with Adrian. She said 11 months, the same month his committee changed the use of the house. I asked how many nights a week she slept there. She said enough that Adrian believed our marriage was already over. "Is it?" I asked. Claire looked around our kitchen, as if the answer were in the cabinets. "It has been over in every room that matters," she said. That sentence was practiced. Maybe she had said it to Adrian. Maybe she had said it to donors when they asked why her contractor still wore a wedding ring. I asked why she kept coming home. She said the timing was complicated. Harbor Home was negotiating a major grant. The gala would put the organization in front of state donors. A divorce, an affair with the board chair, and questions about Cedar Lane could destroy work that helped hundreds of people. Then she offered me money. Not in an envelope. Claire was too polished for that. She said we could sell our house after the gala, and I could keep more than half because of what I had contributed in the early years. All she needed was for me to sit beside her, smile during the tribute, and give her 1 week to control the announcement. "And the survivor story?" I asked. She said it was bigger than either of us now. I told her to leave. Claire picked up her suitcase. At the door, she turned and said the most honest thing she had said all night. "If you attack me publicly, they will believe me before they believe you." She was probably right. The next morning, I told my attorney everything. He told me not to threaten Claire, not to touch shared accounts, and not to publish documents I had no right to use. He also said I was not required to attend the gala or protect a false story about myself. I sent Claire one message. I said I would not discuss the marriage again without attorneys. I asked her to remove me from the tribute video and correct the survivor claim before accepting the award. She called 6 times. I did not answer. Her final voicemail lasted just over a minute. Claire said she loved Adrian. She said Cedar Lane had been empty and nobody had lost a bed because she used it. She said the marriage had ended long before she found the courage to live honestly. Then she told me I had one job left. Let her have the gala, and she would make sure I came out of the divorce comfortable. She ended by saying, "Do not punish all those women because you are embarrassed." That voicemail became the last part of the tribute video. I did not hack the gala system. Claire had named me as the family contact for the official tribute, and the event producer had been waiting for my file. I sent it from the same email address Claire had given them weeks earlier. The video began exactly as promised. There was Claire at 28, painting the Mercer Street kitchen in old jeans. There was the First Harbor Home family holding a set of keys. There was Claire crying when the city approved the second building. There were volunteers, children, staff members, and the work that had been real even while her story about us was becoming false. Then the screen went black. I recorded myself sitting at our kitchen table. I said my name was Noah Brennan. I said I was Claire's current husband, not the violent former husband described in her speeches. I showed our marriage certificate beside that week's gala invitation addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Brennan. I showed the refinance agreement that helped open Mercer Street, with both our signatures on it. I showed the public property record for Cedar Lane and a photograph I had taken from the street of Claire's car beside Adrian's. I did not call her a thief. I did not claim every part of Harbor Home was corrupt. I said the board deserved to learn who had been living in a house represented to donors as part of the program. I said the audience deserved to know that Claire had turned our marriage into a story of abuse while continuing to use my labor, my home, and my presence when it benefited her. Then I added the voicemail. The event producer confirmed she had downloaded the file. She asked me to bring a backup in case the ballroom network failed, so I copied it onto a flash drive and put it in my jacket pocket. Claire assumed my silence meant I had surrendered. That was how I ended up 6 tables from the stage while she thanked me. The ballroom held nearly 400 people. City officials sat near the front. Harbor Home staff filled 2 tables along the wall. Renee was there in a blue dress as part of a group of former residents invited by the organization. Adrian sat at Claire's table, close enough to touch her chair but careful not to. When Claire walked to the microphone, the room stood. She looked directly at me during her speech. "My husband, Noah, taught me that support can be quiet," she said. "He gave me room to become the woman I was meant to be." People turned toward me and applauded. Claire smiled because she believed she had brought me back into the story at exactly the moment she needed me. Then she thanked Adrian for believing survivors when their voices shook. He placed one hand over his heart. The presenter announced the tribute video. The lights dimmed. For the first 40 seconds, Claire watched the screen with tears in her eyes. When the image faded to black, she turned toward me. I saw the exact second she understood that the video was not over. My face appeared above the stage. Nobody moved while I spoke. Not when I said we were still married. Not when our marriage certificate filled the screen. Not when I described Cedar Lane. Adrian stood when the photograph of his car appeared. 2 board members grabbed his arm and told him to sit down. Then Claire's voice came through the ballroom speakers. She said she loved Adrian. She said the house had been empty. She said I had one job left. By the time she said I was embarrassed, the event producer had cut the sound. It did not matter. The room had heard enough. The lights came up slowly. Claire was still holding the award. Her face looked smaller without the screen behind it. The presenter stepped away from her. Melissa, the finance director, was crying at the staff table. Renee stared at me, then at Claire, as if she were rebuilding every story she had been told. Adrian pushed toward the aisle, but 3 board members surrounded him before he reached the booth. Claire walked down from the stage and stopped beside my table. "How could you do this to me?" she whispered. It was the first question she asked. Not whether I had heard the whole voicemail, not what the board knew, not what would happen to the families whose trust she had used. How could I do this to her? I took our house key from my ring and placed it beside her untouched wineglass. "You made the lie public," I said. "I made the correction in the same room." Then I walked out. There was no applause. I am glad there was no applause. What happened in that ballroom was not a victory. It was the end of a marriage and the beginning of an investigation that would frighten people who depended on Harbor Home. But it was not silent anymore. By midnight, the award committee had posted that the honor was under review. The next morning, Harbor Home suspended Claire and Adrian while an outside firm examined the property decisions. The city froze a pending grant, but emergency funding kept the occupied apartments open. The audit took 3 months. It did not reveal suitcases of stolen cash or secret offshore accounts. Reality was less dramatic and more damaging. Adrian had pushed Cedar Lane through as executive housing without disclosing their relationship. Claire had signed reports that described the building as temporarily unavailable to clients because of construction, even after the work was complete. Donor money paid utilities while she and Adrian lived there. The board had relied on her false claim that she needed protection from an estranged husband. Both of them resigned before the final report became public. The award committee withdrew Claire's honor. Harbor Home survived under Melissa and a new board, but 2 expansion projects were delayed and several longtime donors left. Claire blamed me for that in our first mediation session. She said I could have taken the evidence to the board privately. She was right, I could have. I told her I had chosen the gala because the lie was about to be sealed into a public honor. I wanted the same audience that applauded the false story to hear my name attached to the truth. That choice had a cost. Some people called me brave, others called me vindictive. A columnist wrote that exposing an affair during a charity gala was an act of male rage, even though I had never raised my voice. For a while, strangers sent messages to my business. Paul answered the phones because I could not hear one more person decide what kind of husband I was from a 2-minute clip. I do not pretend I exposed Claire only to protect donors. Part of me wanted her to feel the floor disappear beneath the life she had built over me. But I never regretted correcting the story. Claire moved out of Cedar Lane 2 days after the gala. Adrian returned to his wife, who filed for divorce anyway. Claire rented an apartment across town and sent me long emails about pressure, ambition, and the way public work had swallowed her identity. The first sincere apology came 4 months later. She wrote that she had discovered people listened longer when she made herself the survivor. At first, She borrowed emotions from the women she served. Then she borrowed details from our marriage. Eventually, she needed me to become smaller and uglier so her courage could look larger. She admitted she kept coming home because our house was where she felt safe. Cedar Lane was where she felt admired. She had called one life dead while feeding from both of them. I believed that apology. I still signed the divorce papers. Harbor Home eventually converted Cedar Lane into 2 apartments as originally promised. My company did not bid on the work. I had spent enough years repairing rooms so Claire could stand inside them and tell people I was the damage. Last month I sold our house. Before the realtor came, I removed photographs and patched the small holes they left behind. In the dining room, there was one heavy screw Claire had installed for the framed Woman of the Year certificate she expected to bring home. The frame never made it through our door. I pulled the screw out with the back of a hammer. The hole was barely wider than a pencil, but dark paint dust had gathered around it, making it look larger. I filled it, sanded it, and painted over the spot. When the wall dried, I could still find the patch because I knew where to look. Anyone else would have walked past it. That felt honest. Some damage becomes invisible without becoming unreal. And sometimes the only quiet thing a man can do is stop helping the person who caused it hide the mark.